Also watching the fallout from Joe Biden's remarks, in case you had any doubts that things are going to change if he becomes president of the United States, especially with regard to Wall Street, this put that to rest. Take a listen.
Let's make sure their workers have a power and the voice. It's way past time we put an end to the era of shareholder capitalism. The idea the only responsibility a corporation has is with shareholders. That's simply not true. It's an absolute farce. They have responsibility to their workers, their community, to their country.
All right, now the former vice president coughed. I think I heard Wall Street puke when he said that, because this is not what they want to hear. Now, they don't have to be Republican or Democrat, but they like the money they've been making in a low-tax environment, low regulatory environment, the so-called Trump environment. So whatever they might think of the president personally, they like the goods he's delivered at the corner of Wall and Broad, and they don't take too kindly to a possible president saying that shareholder capitalism and idolizing those days, those are gone. I don't know how Bernie Marcus feels about it, but I'm so glad I have him with us right now. One of my favorite guests, all the decades I've been working at Fox, who has a good read on this. No doubt, of course, the co-founder of Home Depot, as optimistic and spry as he was when he came up with that company. Bernie, it's so good to have you. What do you think of this? He's sick, that is Joe Biden, of shareholder capitalism.
Well, first of all, here's a guy that never worked in his life. I think he's been in government all his life, so he really doesn't understand how business works. I could tell you, Neil, and you have had Kenny and myself on many, many times. Home Depot, without the capital market.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, Ken Lango, right? Without the capital market, wouldn't be here today. We have 2,700 stores doing over $100 billion in sales a year. And we say it happened because of the capital market. We had 4 stores, we were undercapitalized. We didn't know how we were going to continue. We were having trouble paying our bills. And we went to the market. We had profits on the stores that we had. It looked pretty good. We went to the market, and the market gave us additional financing in order to grow the company. So the stock market has become very, very important for us, as it is for all small businesses. Look, if you talk about the fact that we owe it to our employees, well, yes, of course, there is a concern about the employees, and Home Depot has done everything in its power to make sure that its employees were part and parcel of what we did. So they got a piece of the action. Many people became very wealthy with Home Depot as the stock climbed and as we opened more and more stores. But the capital market became very important to us. And to talk about this from a standpoint of a government employee who's never, ever been involved with the marketplace, I don't give it too much credibility. In fact, it's very concerning. As one of your speakers said, the 401ks, most of America is invested in a stock market in one way or another in 401ks. So if you're going to close down the market, you're going to be in deep trouble. I will tell you that. It just doesn't make any sense to me. But hey, most of what he says doesn't make sense anyway.
All right, so I'm going to put you down as a maybe on Joe Biden. But let me ask you then, Bernie, about the kind of message he's sending. Be suspicious of Wall Street, be suspicious of those billionaires and those real capitalist success stories, because I'm not about helping them. I'm about helping you. I'm glad you pointed out that most Americans, whether they know it or not, are directly or indirectly invested in the market success. Leaving that aside, he clearly is trying to capitalize on that anti-Wall Street view that's out there. What do you think?
Well, look, that's yesterday's discussion that he had was written for him. It's probably not going to be anything that he's going to do because he's surrounded by these left-wing people. He did talk about raising taxes, which he will do. He didn't talk about what the onerous regulations that they had. When Trump came into office, the regulations were strangling small businesses and businesses of all kind. And the first thing he did was get rid of those regulations. He hasn't changed. He's part of 8 years of a organization that had low employment, very high unemployment rates. Businesses were going down. You remember that Obama said 1.5% was the new norm on GPS. So they were used to, and they were pushing the fact that America could not be better. Well, Trump brought it up to a very good number before the virus hit. Numbers that we had never seen before. Unemployment was down dramatically. Unemployment for the minorities was down dramatically. The GDP was great, and then this horrible virus came in and killed it all for a while. But let me ask a question: the American people, who would you rather have? A man who created good job market, created a good economy, or would you rather have Joe Biden, who was there for 8 years, and we looked at a terrible economy for 8 years? I don't know. It seems to me every business person out there and everybody who has a job would understand that he's not the guy that's going to bring it back. This is a really bad deal. Small businesses are getting hammered, as you heard from your other speakers.
Right. Well, Bernie, let me just, I just want to let people know what they're watching as you're speaking. The president has arrived right now in Doral, Florida. He's going to be speaking at U.S. Command up there. He has a fundraiser later tonight, a planned event tomorrow night in New Hampshire has been canceled because of this tropical storm about to hit much of the East Coast. It already is, in the Atlantic East Coast, all the way up through New England, including New Hampshire. So the president's canceled that. But Bernie, you were mentioning what the environment was like under Barack Obama. I think you were referring to the lower GDP growth that he had anticipated. Still, a lot of people go back to those Obama years. Now, of course, he came in the middle of a big recession, and the numbers improved, but it was steady growth. And the Obama folks come back, Joe Biden comes back and says, we created a hell of a lot of jobs. We were down in near depression territory, and we created a lot more activity than this president is stuck with right now. How do you think the president should respond to that? Because he's already addressed the capitalism issue, the shareholder capitalism, it's a nasty word. But there is a strategy here to say, we're about you, America. We don't talk about the stock market, its advance. We talk about things that matter to you. How do they counter that?
Well, the facts, of course, we don't believe the facts anymore. A lot of this, what we read in the papers, the media, unfortunately, is not a media that gives facts. The facts are that jobs weren't plentiful. The fact is the GDP was down. 8 years is 8 years. Oh, Trump is in office for 3 years, and in 3 years, we've seen the dramatic change. How did it happen? It's not, let's look at it, Neil. First thing he did was lower taxes. That's number one. Number two, he killed regulations. And in killing regulations and lowering taxes, he created more jobs in America. Look, Reagan proved this point. Yeah, you have to be really stupid not to go back in history. And by the way, we try to keep history out of our schools today. We don't want people to understand history, but history repeats itself over and over again. And we know that when you raise taxes and when you start putting in regulations, you're going to kill the economy. Now, that's a very fundamental thing that economists, even left-wing economists, have to agree on. So I think that Trump has to stay on that message. Look, it's not a question of me supporting Trump. I'm supporting economic. I'm very concerned about the American economy. I'm concerned about people who are worried about paying their for food, paying their rent, paying for their cars. They need the jobs desperately. And so this is not a Republican or a Democratic thing that I'm talking about. I'm talking about the real world. In the real world today, people in the middle class are getting hammered. Of course, the middle and the lower class are getting hammered together. So we have to get back into creating jobs. And if we don't create jobs, the economy is going to be dead. It's as simple as that. It's not a rocket scientist type thing.
All right. Bernie, you got to learn to speak your mind more, because I never quite know where you're coming from, my friend. Always good having you. Have a wonderful weekend. Bernie Marcus, a true American success story. Started Home Depot with Ken Langone. As I've said many times, neither even knew which end of a hammer to use. And yet, handy though they were not, they were pretty successful at that. And that guy decided to put one of the world's most highly regarded aquariums in Atlanta. Yeah, it's a little inland, but he said, you know what? Atlanta should have one. Now it does. One of the world's best. That, my friends, is shareholder capitalism.